Good evening. We'll call the October meeting of the County Services Committee to order. Are there any changes to the agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I know you always look forward to me changing your agenda, but I have something I'd like to bring up on the road department.
Okay. What's the title of the edition?
I don't know that I've got a title. I've got a paragraph. You want to hear it now or later?
That's okay. We'll just say that'll be new item number 9 if you have a second and if it's voted in. Do I hear a second? Second by J.P. Pond. All those in favor of adding discussion on a road department, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Item has been added. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
I so move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda has been adopted with the addition of a new item number 9, which is road department discussion. J.P. Dennis. The first item up on the agenda, number 4, is, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I skipped the prayer and pledge. Justice Simmons, will you please lead us in prayer and pledge?
Yes, sir.
Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you humbly asking your guidance and wisdom this evening as we conduct the county's business. May we represent ourselves and our community and conduct ourselves respectfully. Lord, please lead us, guide us, and protect us. Be with those that are ill. Pray that you'll put your healing hand upon them. And thank you for your many, many blessings. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, J.P. Simons. And on to item number 4, the review of the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy with AEDI. I want to thank Amber Berg for being here this evening with some of her colleagues. Amber is the Community Development and Planning Division Head of Arkansas Development Institute. She is going to be taking us through the SED study and giving a preview of a SED study to be done. Ms. Berg. Yes. Okay. And you'll hit the icon with the little person on it.
Okay, thank you. Can y'all hear me? Okay. So as Sam mentioned, I'm Amber Berg. I'm with the Arkansas Economic Development Institute. We're an outreach unit of the University of Arkansas at Little Rock campus. We're the EDA University Center there. And so what we do is we help communities and the state's economic and planning development districts to develop long-range plans and secure grants to do different things for economic and community development in their regions. So one of these projects include the Northwest Arkansas SEDS, which is what you all have a handout of. And this document is a long-range planning community outreach effort. We met with a also to back up a little bit, this project occurred before I came on with AEDI, but we do have one of our staff member here who was there when this process was undertaken. But typically when we go through a SEDS, including when we did this Northwest Arkansas SEDS project, we have a committee formed that represents the region or the community that we're working with, and they help guide the project, and we just offer our resources and expertise and data to help guide it. And so what a SEDS is it's a comprehensive economic development strategy, and it takes 4 steps, which is like background and information gathering, so trying to get a sense of the community and its assets, its trends over time, and how the community and economy is changing. And then we do a SWOT analysis, which is a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So that looks at what are the different resources the community has, what can they improve upon, what do they need to watch out for, what do they need to overcome, things like that. And that's an outreach process. We do that with the committee. Sometimes that occurs with broader members of the community as a whole. And then those first 2 steps inform the following steps, which are identifying action steps and evaluation strategies. So these are really the important part of the plan, where we're helping the community identify steps that they can take to better the community, either in regards to the economy or their infrastructure. And then the evaluation framework just helps make sure that we don't just have this document and it sit on a shelf over time, but that we're evaluating whether we're meeting those action steps that we laid out and so on. And we really try to make these documents actionable and not just aspirational. These documents, as you skim through here, the Northwest Arkansas SEDS really focuses on areas such as tourism, infrastructure, broadband, housing, and it looks at it for the region as a whole, although it does have a little bit of data breakdown for each of the counties in the region. So Judge Wood came to us to ask if we could do a SEDS for Washington County specifically. So that would follow a similar process, but the benefit is that instead of having a regional overview, it would be specific to the county, obviously, specific to the county's communities, and then we can develop action steps for the county specifically as well. One particular reason that Judge Wood reached out to us at this time is that when we do the data and the background and the SWOT aspect of this plan, that can help inform some of the decision-making with ARPA funds for the county. But also the benefit of this document is that it really is a long-range plan. So after we hand it off to you all and you adopt it, it can help guide future economic development decisions, but also this can be used as a tool to strengthen any EDA grants you all might apply for in the future, even after ARPA. So that's a really broad and short and quick overview. If we move forward with this process, I believe that would be up to Judge Wood, and he would form some type of committee for us to meet with and get this kick-started. The Northwest SEDS took about 9 months, and we anticipate that if we did one for Washington County, it would take about 6 months with the Christmas holiday. If you wanted it to be a little more intensive, or if anything with ARPA kind of was a roadblock, then it might take up to 12 months maximum, but probably 6 months.
And I did want to just reiterate for the court, the idea of the study would be to help inform future decisions around American Rescue Plan funding, and then obviously other funding mechanisms as well. But I think it's a really interesting opportunity to dig down more specific to our county rather than just the region. I think that's one of the reasons Amber's here this evening as well. The next item on the agenda will be going through a discussion of how we'd like to see rescue plan funds utilized. And at that time, I'll ask my colleagues on the court who are not on the committee to join us to be part of that discussion. And I think that will help inform her as she goes and does the interview process with different groups throughout the county and collects data. But what questions do you have for Amber? Open it up to the committee. JP Wilson.
I guess the obvious question would be, is there a cost involved with this? I haven't heard that mentioned.
Amber, can you speak to that?
That might be project dependent on an agreement with Judge Wood and our executive director, Jim Youngquist. Sometimes we're able to use EDA University Center funds to help offset some of the costs. Sometimes there's a little bit of an agreement, but that would just be whatever we can come to an agreement on based on what we offer and what kind of investment the county wants to make in that.
JP Dennis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question would be this, probably explained very well in here. I live in Farmington, and so I know there's a great push right now to do some things like this. So how would we, what are the steps for me to take this to the, do I take this to the mayor? Do you go see the mayor? How does it work on that, on just the process?
On the process of developing the plan?
Yes, otherwise bringing what they're doing to your attention.
So that might involve some coordination with Judge Wood, and also when we do the outreach process, we might have like open houses or community surveys where we go out into each community of the county and try to get more involved with them, to hear from them and not just county representatives at the top level or from some of the larger cities, but we want to try to reach all communities in the area because they're all integral to the whole county.
Okay, I probably should have explained it a little bit, and that we could
Okay.
say I'm on the right trail or I'm on the wrong trail. They're wanting to develop medical manufacturing. And so they're wanting to use the city of Farmington to do that in, or that area. And so, is that the right track? I mean, so you help on that?
Possibly. I think the SEDS document specifically might just look at what is already being done in that regard. And then if there's input from the community, including city leaders, about whether that's a good or bad idea, then we might examine some strategies on how to address that, either move forward with it or don't, and how to ensure that that's a benefit to the community.
Okay.
I apologize if that was broad, but really, this document will be driven by the community. I don't know if we will get down into the weeds to that level, but it just kind of depends on what the community we're working with wants.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
JP Rio Stafford.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was curious about, looking at this plan for the whole region. How long did it take to develop this strategy, and what kind of timeline would we be looking at for developing a strategy just for Washington County?
This one took about 9 months. And so for Washington County, it would probably take about 6 months. Of course, that's dependent on the upcoming Christmas break, when we start, whether ARPA becomes a larger priority. But probably 6 months, a year maximum, and that's only if the judge or someone decides that they want it to be really intensive, or if other things become a priority.
Okay.
So,
And it looks like it came out in 2019. Is that right?
mhm.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to add, we worked on this with the Northwest Arkansas Economic Development District,
Okay.
by the way.
Great. And then, yeah, I am just seeing this for the first time, and it looks, I'm noticing that there's 7 priorities in here: workforce housing, broadband internet, infrastructure. A lot of these dovetail with things that are that the American Rescue Plan funds could be used for. I've noticed just off the bat. Without having you, go deep into the weeds here, do you know, looks like do you know offhand if probably most of these priorities apply not just to the whole region, but also to, Washington County specifically? I assume that probably all of these apply to our county in some way.
Probably. Again, I wasn't as involved. Well, I wasn't involved whenever this plan specifically was being developed. But I think the speakers from Northwest Arkansas could speak to that a little bit more about which of these might be specific to Washington County.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
JP Simons.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Amber, for being here. I'm curious how the recent census numbers will change these figures. But my question is, have you started seeing some of these other counties already start utilizing this document? And if so, in what ways have you seen them be successful in implementing some of these strategies?
I don't, with my short time at ADI, I started last year. I hope this doesn't come off as an excuse. I haven't seen specifically anyone in Northwest Arkansas using this, but other plans that we've developed that are similar to this, like we developed a plan for Pine Bluff, we developed a plan for the city of Jasper, and they've already been implementing strategies from their city's plans. So like Pine Bluff is revitalizing their downtown. The city of Jasper has updated their zoning ordinances and their subdivision regulations, and they're looking at parking in their downtown as a result of the plan. And I don't believe if AEDI did the SEDS for Southwest Arkansas, but either way, as a result of that SEDS being done, we're now working with Sevier County to develop a countywide SEDS. So similar to Washington County, it's going to be more specific to their community. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from the committee or those not on the committee? Other JPs? No? Ms. Berg, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
The next item on the agenda is discussion on American Rescue Plan funds. I will ask those JPs who are not on the committee if you would come up to the horseshoe. This will be an open discussion I want to have among not just the committee members, but those who are not on the committee to get everyone's input. So if you would come up and sit around the horseshoe. So this is our opportunity to share perspective on how each justice sees the American Rescue Plan funds being utilized to best benefit Washington County. The idea also is with Amber Berg and her group here with AEDI, it's a chance for them to hear and capture how Washington County sees the specific SED study benefiting and kind of the perspective from the JPs. So with that, I will open it up to my colleagues on the court to share their perspective on how they'd like to see the American Rescue Plan funds utilized. JP Madison.
I think we should be asking these questions of the community, and we should be having listening sessions for members of our community. My understanding from talking to folks at the Association of County is that Benton County has really set the gold standard for how they are doing their American Rescue Fund plans. Not only are they having open meetings for community members, but they publish absolutely everything online. And not only I think is that very beneficial in terms of how the funds are going to be spent, but it's going to be very helpful in terms of the documentation when they have to justify to Treasury the expenditure of the funds, because my understanding is that that back end is going to be very challenging, because we could be looking at in 2024, Treasury coming back and saying, yeah, that expenditure didn't cut it. You now owe us X millions of dollars. So I think hearing from the community should be the first step, because I don't know that we're necessarily the best equipped to know the community needs. But Benton County has put in place a process for governmental entities as well as private citizens, community groups to basically apply for funds. And I'd like to see Washington County implement something like that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, JP Madison. I think that's a great segue to the rest of the evening. So we'll have discussion around an application process that is non-government interest. And so my hope is that we've had a chance to talk to our constituents and those within the county and can bring a perspective not just of our own, but also from our constituents. So that's the idea for the conversation tonight. I think I saw next JP Wilson and then JP Rio Staffords will go that way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my understanding that the judge had a concept of an application process that we would allow people to apply for funds, and that we would then, those applications would be reviewed, and then the court would then accept at some level some of the applications. And so if it would seem like we need a process like that to go through, as opposed to just, us saying, I want this or I want that. I had brought in an application or an ordinance last time, and the committee narrowly passed it forward, but I asked that it be tabled until November because the judge asked that we go through this application process. And it seems like rather than us doing other things right now, we might want to just step back and do that.
Thank you, JP Wilson. Again, we'll have further discussion around that here shortly. So JP Rio Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll probably try to keep it short because I think people have already heard enough from me about how we should use this money. I've talked about it in previous quorum court meetings. I've talked about it on social media. I've been to the community. I've been one of the few JPs to show up in person to one of the community cookouts that the outside group has been having about how to spend these funds and listening to the public at those. I've been on Zoom meetings talking about this. And so, I agree with the calls for, hearing more from the public and having having an application process like Benton County does. I think that is a really good idea. And I'm really pleased that we are even having this discussion tonight. But just due to the nature of how we conduct our business, this agenda for tonight didn't come out until Friday at noon, which was a pretty quick turnaround to let the public know that this was going to be discussed tonight, and it really is. $46 million. It's probably one of the biggest discussions that this quorum court has had in years and years and years. It's one of the biggest decisions in terms of dollar amount. That many of us might ever be making. So I think it's definitely incredibly important to get that kind of input. So thank you. I'm interested to hear what other folks have to say who we haven't heard very much from.
Thank you, JP Stefford. JP Deakins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to say that, where I've been in this journey with the ARPA funds so far is, we really have to ensure that the essential services of the county continue. And I think we're going to continue to see a little bit of challenges there. I think if you talk to, we're going to hear in the coming days from our central EMS partners about, them being overworked, their resources being highly taxed during this pandemic. We've heard from our detention centers, both the juvenile and the adult, that they're having a hard time hiring people. It's been difficult to get qualified individuals into those roles. We're going to hear tonight from some needs from our rural firefighters. And so to me, if we're going to look at a prioritization of where we're moving, I think we have to gather all those facts and make sure those things are taken care of first, because that to me is our obligation first and foremost to the taxpayers of Washington County, is making sure, once again, those essential services, if we want to start using that term, are covered. And I think we're only seeing some of those challenges. I think they're going to become more apparent over the next few weeks, as I think we've had a lot of great dedicated people stepping up, working really hard, and I think you can only run at the red line for so long before issues start to arise. And so I invite all the JPs, and I think probably it's there's a great opportunity to have more discussions with our elected officials to realize what is possible with the ARPA funds. Specifically to me, one of the most intriguing things is this enhanced pay, this concept of being able to pay our employees a premium right now when working in these difficult situations. And I think especially, that speaks to me with any of our first responders and especially our detention officers. So, that's where I would like to see us spend priority. I like the concept of this application process, but all that's secondary in my mind until we can fund the essential services. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, JP Deakins. JP Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Patrick kind of stole my thunder, but when we spent the money on the sheriff and the coroners at that time, I thought that we were going to also consider COVID pay for the road department, the county clerk, the treasurer, the assessor's office, juvenile. I thought we were going to include all employees on that COVID pay. And I don't want to miss the opportunity to say that we still should look at that and consider the payment for them as well, like we did for the sheriff's department. Because I thought that it was going to be done back before, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to have it done now. So that's one that it's on my list. Thank you.
Thank you, JP Dennis.
I forgot something.
JP Medicine.
Sorry. I'm sorry. One of the other things that I learned was that for any large capital expenditure that we're spending, like on the county, it's been recommended that we hire a consultant that is like, well, I asked if there were like law firms giving opinions, like, can we spend the money on this? Can we spend it on that? make sure that we're doing it right, just because of the risk of having to pay it back in a few years. And apparently there are several entities, including like Witt and Associates out of Washington, that are providing consulting services to local governments to help them navigate that process. And so one of the things I think we ought to build into thinking about the expenditure is, especially if we're looking like at something like a jail expansion, which may be questionable under the Treasury guidelines, is to make sure that we are consulting with someone who understands the Treasury process and the regs, and making sure we build into the costs, them helping us do it the right way. Because to me, the biggest risk is in doing great things and then realizing in 2024 they say, oh, guess what, you owe us $5 million. you spent this money that you shouldn't have spent. And so to have a partner in it, I think, to help us make sure we do it right, is very valuable. And I know that NACO and the Association of Counties have a list of consultants that are doing that, which is something I think that we should build in to the process to the extent we're thinking about large county expenditures. And I think if we're talking about spending money on, outside entities applying, I think that's different. But I just wanted to share that information because I thought it was really helpful. So thanks.
Thank you, JP Madison. Other members of the court. District 1, JP Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we first got the first $4.5 million 10 or 12 years ago, when we started talking about this, the first thing came to my mind was the JDC. I mean, that facility and the improvements to that facility were put on hold because of COVID. I don't think there's a better place for the county to spend the money. The second thing is we've got to make the jail functional with the COVID situation. None of us know when it goes away, and if we can't bring a detainee to the courthouse and take them back to jail without quarantining them for 14 days, we've got to give the sheriff the facility to do that, because essentially we've had our court system shut down, and we've got to fix that. I absolutely believe that. And to my colleague's comment, we got to find out exactly how we can spend the money properly. But if the consultant doesn't have the liability for the recommendations that they give us, we're just wasting our money. Thank you.
I think JP Pond and then JP Simons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go along with my colleagues who are bringing up essential services. I'm going to bring up an issue about the jail. When this whole COVID thing started, one of the, I thought, most important programs that it's almost a diversion program at the jail was our work release facility. Had to discontinue that and use that space at the jail for a quarantine area. And behind the scenes, I had approached some of the folks down at the county jail, county sheriff's office, and explained to them that if something would be really wrong, if we can't build some kind of a facility down there for quarantine, so we could have our work release program brought back. I can't begin to tell you how important that is for some of the individuals with families. If you've got a work release program, they might be able to keep their job, pay their bills, have some kind of a situation where they're still taking care of their family. because of everything that came down on us with COVID, a bunch of that went away. That's just one example. And if that means, I mean, you can put that in the jail expansion category or put it anywhere you want or label it anything else you want to. But that is a situation that was caused because of everything we've had to address with the COVID situation. And that's just one. And I'm going to say that's in the essential services category. Thank you for allowing me to speak on such dull and boring things, which is the way I like government. Thank you.
Thank you, J.P. Bond. J.P. Simons.
Thank you, Chair. And full recognition that I'm kind of a newbie here on the court and still figuring a lot of these things out. I think we need to keep in mind that not only do we need to make a priority to spend these money properly, since it is a one-time windfall potentially, we should be looking at in our decision process and our consideration that we make as much impact and as much sustainability as we can with these decisions. So we've had opportunities to make a huge impact, but it's not sustainable, or vice versa. So ideally what I'd like to see at the core of our decision making is what is the overall impact into our community and helping our neighbors, and how sustainable can we make that instead of just a one-time drop in the bucket or a one-time extension of help or services or resources. And ideally we make doing impactful and sustainable by working collaboratively with community resources that already exist. We shouldn't be up here trying to figure out how to reinvent the wheel. We should look to the community existing resources and see how can we bolster some of those and bring those up, and see if we can't kind of improve on what's already there.
Any other discussion from members of the court?
A couple of things. First of all, I'd like to just go along with Mr. Johnson. I had went down and I went through the juvenile court, and it certainly opened my eyes in a lot of areas. And those guys have been affected by COVID in a major way because kids quit going to school, and they have to follow up on the delinquents. I mean, it's required by law, and they're just absolutely overwhelmed. And so I think that's one need we need to look at. I think the second thing is we need to obviously have two categories. One is for the community, and one is for the government entities. And on the government entities, there are several people that I know that the rural water department, the rural water people could certainly, and I know that the rural fire departments certainly have suffered because of the COVID. And I think that all these agencies, that we need to figure out a way to communicate with them to make sure that they look and see, again, what we can do that'll be sustainable. And I think we've got to use this wisely. Thank you.
Thank you, J.P. Ostry. Any other comments? Well, thank you for members of the court. You're welcome to stay up here. We'll move on to the next item, which is item number 6, discussion and review of potential partnership with Northwest Arkansas Economic Development District for application for non-governmental request of ARP funds. I have the executive director, Joe Willis, with us tonight, and he has 2 members of his staff, Katherine and Jeremy as well, and I will let him take the floor. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having us. As he said, my name is Joe Willis. I'm the executive director of the Northwest Arkansas Economic Development District. We're based in Harrison, and we are one of 8 legislatively created entities like ours that exist all across the state of Arkansas. These districts were actually originated in the mid-'60s at the federal level with the passage of the Public Works Act, which overseen by the Department of Commerce. And the idea was to establish entities that would serve as a conduit between the federal government and state and local government, more emphasis particularly on local government. And that legislation encouraged states to create districts and boundaries and jurisdictions. So in 1967, Arkansas created the 8 development districts all across and established the home office for those, which is in Harrison for this, covers the top 2-tier counties along the state, so Benton and Washington all the way over to Baxter. So we have a 9-county area that we represent. And so we've been in existence since 1967. And what we do primarily is provide grant administration services by and large to cities and counties. So when cities and counties are seeking grant money from the federal level for infrastructure, for job creation, for a whole host of things, we have a vast experience in that, and we provide those requests to the federal government, and then if that's approved, then we administer those funds. So what Judge Wood had talked to me about was perhaps serving in the role of a review of eligibility for non-governmental requests through these ARP funds. And I told him that we would be happy to do that. We have a lot of experience. We've managed EDA grants, Economic Development Administration. We've handled CDBG stuff through HUD. We do a lot of stuff for FEMA. So we have a vast experience, a good background in handling federal grants and all of the accounting and all of the rules that have to be monitored and managed. So we had a discussion about that, and those discussions have continued. And as Chairman Duncan mentioned, I have a couple of staff members with me tonight. Jeremy Ragland's our Deputy Director. Katherine Baker is in our Community Development Department, also our General Counsel. She's an attorney on our staff, and she's really kind of our go-to person on ARPA. We've had many, many, many meetings with both city and county officials and have delved deeply into the ARPA legislation, so we think we have a really good handle on what's eligible and what not. And so we're prepared to serve in that role if there's a need for that, and there's further discussion about wanting to have an independent third party to kind of review applications and to help establish an application, create one, and kind of take a look at that. That fits with what we do, and we have a lot of experience in that field, and we're happy to do so. So that's really all I kind of wanted to cover, and I'd like to turn it over to Katherine at your discretion and your pleasure when that time comes, and she's going to kind of get into more of the specifics. But before I do that, I'm happy to answer any questions for anybody before I vacate the seat.
Any questions from the court? JP Lemming?
What's the percentage on the grant you write?
That varies. It depends on the complexity of it. And so we don't yet know in this instance what might be required of us. And so we haven't really determined. There are also some issues about procurement that have to be considered as well. So anything in excess of $35,000 of admin fees that are paid have to be procured. It's just state law and federal law as well. So
that's on every one, 35,000?
That's total. That would be total. So if our fee exceeded $35,000, or if the fee to be paid for these services exceeded $35,000, then it would have to be procured. And by that means it would have to be put out for bid for other entities to bid as well. Under $35,000, you don't have to do that. You don't have to place it out for public bid. It can just be contracted with us privately. So it depends again on the complexity of it. And
okay.
JP Simons.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Willis, for
Yes,
being
sir.
here tonight. One of my concerns, and this kind of came to my mind early on in this conversation of the non-government entities being able to apply. My thought is many of those they probably haven't received other funding. You mentioned the CBDG grant funds and other economic development funds. They haven't received those for some sort of reason. And I know one nonprofit that comes to my mind is the Children's Safety Center in Washington County. Because of the particular type of services that they provide and the population that they serve, they can't meet the requirements for the auditing and the data collection, right, because of HIPAA. And so that just
marks them off of the eligibility list. In your experience, are there ways to massage those guidelines while still maintaining the ability to fit within the parameters and help those type of organizations who otherwise might not qualify?
I would say
some
to
funding
a certain
sources?
degree, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step away, I apologize. To a certain degree, yes. I think there's a minimum standard that the court would want to establish that if you don't meet this level of proficiency or efficiency or professionalism, you probably don't need to be applying for it. And I say that in all honesty because ultimately it's the county's responsibility that these funds get spent in accordance with the eligibility guidelines, much to what the JP said earlier. So if you award these funds to a nonprofit, then you have to follow and chase that all the way to the ultimate conclusion of spending that money and then make sure that you're able to report that back to the federal government that those expenditures were made in accordance with the eligibility guidelines. So our role, were we to be selected, is we would provide you with a basic eligibility question, yes or no, and then we could perhaps provide you some color on that, some narrative surrounding that application as to impact and so on and so forth. And so were you to award that to that entity, that just begins the process because they may have applied for X, which may be entirely eligible, but there's also an incumbency upon the county to make sure that the ultimate spending of that was done in accordance with what they said they would, or there could be an Office of Inspector General or any entity that comes back and says, hey, that, prove to us that was spent in accordance with the eligibility. You find out later it wasn't, and then that money could have to be repaid. Your intentions were honorable. You approved it based on a certain set of recommendations and proposals, but it wasn't spent properly in the end. So I think that's where, in the beginning, if you establish a threshold of you got to be able to meet a certain level of professionalism and experience and time in the seat, that kind of weeds out some who might not, if that's the proper way to say it, who might not have the expertise or the capacity to be sure that you guys aren't on the hook for improperly misspent funds.
JP Rios-Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm starting to see, I guess, how all the pieces here are starting to come together of what we're discussing tonight. But I guess my question would be that if Washington County decided to go forward to work with the Arkansas Economic Development Institute on a economic development strategy just for Washington County, how do you see, or do you think that could be used sort of almost as a roadmap in a way, as a guideline for ways that spending the American Rescue Plan funds might be most impactful?
Yes, I think it could be a collaborative effort. I think certainly that we would need to work with them because when that comprehensive economic development strategy was established, it was not with obviously anticipation of ARPA funds. And so it was an overall economic development strategy that encompassed a whole lot of areas. This would be what I would envision more of a needs assessment based specifically on what the ARPA funds have available, as opposed to maybe a full-fledged 7-point all-comprehensive economic development strategy, which is an entirely different effort. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of serve in the arena of the ARPA funds and kind of have the expertise in that area, whereas theirs, and they're a valued partner of ours, and that's why we suggested bringing them to the table, theirs is in developing these surveys and conducting this whole assessment arena of what's needed out there and how you procedurally, logistically go about finding that information out. So it would be up to the court's pleasure as to whether those are done in tandem or whether you go ahead and make an effort to move forward with some fund disbursement to some non-governmental entities while this process plays itself out. And I don't pretend to be in that position at all. That's certainly your position to decide.
JP Stafford, do you mind if I comment on that piece?
Yeah.
From conversations with the judge and as we thought through this process, the hope would be that we establish a partnership, whether that be with Northwest Arkansas Economic Development District or with another group, but to go ahead and post an application online as soon as November 1 and have an open application timeframe, have that closed, reviewed for eligibility by whatever group is selected, and then those would be submitted to the court saying, yes, they meet eligible funding requirements, and then, hey, here's some information essentially from going through the application to help the court make that decision. And then it'll be the pleasure of the court. And at the same time, the SEDS specific needs study for Washington County would be taking place. Since that'll be a 6-month process, we don't want to wait. We'd like to go ahead and get ahead of it. But knowing we have more funds available next year, and obviously we have a significant amount of funds available now, but one of the agenda items coming up is a discussion around how much of the American Rescue Plan funds to designate to non-government request. And so the idea would be to go ahead and start the process of the application and opening that up to the public or to non-government, essentially, closing that application in December, giving a 6-week application time frame, having those applications vet, and then coming before the court, and then go ahead and distributing funds afterwards, then being able to review the said study for Washington County and make further decisions based on that study. Does that make sense? I hope that was clear.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the only sort of question mark that's still hanging there is what you were talking about of whether the said study is going to look at just an overall comprehensive of all the needs in Washington County, or focus specifically on things that could be most helped by American Rescue Plan funds, or both, really. Kind of is sort of what you were saying is kind of what's still to be decided,
Right.
If that moves forward. Okay. And then I just had one more final question. Do you have a couple examples, do you know, off the top of your head, of grants that Washington County has gotten through working with your organization?
Yes, we've worked with the city of Fayetteville, and on 2 different occasions, actually, the Fayetteville Chamber of Commerce on a robotics lab, and we got them a federal grant for a fab lab and a robotics training center. Also with the city of Fayetteville on their industrial park to help them open up the remaining piece of that so that it could be available for industry. We are in the final stages of one with Springdale, the final stages of actually getting the engineering work and everything ready to proceed with Springdale on a project to bring an employer to an area that needed a road extended. And so we had to ask EDA for, I think it was, Jeremy, help me, how much, $2 million? About $2 million. About $2 million was that EDA grant, and it extended a road and made all of the infrastructure open and available for that employer to locate there to bring jobs there. So there's some examples in Washington County.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
JP Estrie.
Thank you. One of my questions is there a vetting process as far as a number of entities are getting the American Rescue Funds? And so Springdale, Fayetteville, the state, and is there a way to check to make sure that people are not double dipping?
I think there certainly could be. It's not anything that we have contemplated at this level, because I think what we're seeing by and large is, and I say by and large, that most of those funds have been allocated to governmental entities at this point for those that have been spent. I know there are some discussions, as was mentioned, that Benton County is reviewing that for NGOs and nonprofits. But that can all be part of this whole scenario, that because these lines have not been colored in. This is just kind of big picture about, yeah, we want to create an application. We want to kind of establish some criteria about who's eligible, and then review that for eligible uses. And that's kind of where it's gotten to, and the rest can be decided. If there's an emphasis on that, that absolutely could be added to the mix.
I would think it'd definitely be part of the process.
Sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
There are questions from the court. If not, we'll open it up to the eligibility piece.
Yeah, if I may, I'll introduce Katherine Baker and, from our staff, and she's going to talk about eligibility and so on.
And to give some insight to this, I know, JPs, we have varying levels of understanding of the eligibility, and I'm saying that from, I probably have one of the lower understandings as I've read through the documentation, but I thought this would be an awesome opportunity to have Katherine come up. She's put together a one-pager and is going to take us through that just as a quick overview. So this is kind of a crash course on ARP 101 eligibility.
Thank you. I do have a one-pager, and I've also printed the relevant section of the interim final rule. There are references by page number. And I didn't make very many copies, but I would like to pass that out to the committee if you would like a copy.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sure she could email us the rest of it.
Yes.
Thanks, sir.
I'm Katherine Baker. I am a grant administrator and also general counsel at the Northwest Arkansas Economic Development District. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I know that every community across our 9-county area and certainly all across the United States is having the same discussion. And while it can be thorny and complex, there are also some very clearly set guidelines in the rule. And it doesn't have to be a difficult navigation, although I know there are a lot of questions that have to be answered. Our organization, in administering grants and in our day-to-day work, have come across many different applications through many different federal and state agencies. So we have put together a sketch of what we think the application would look like if we were selected to be your partner in developing the application and the vetting process for non-governmental organizations that apply for rescue plan funds. The threshold question is whether their proposed project would be eligible under the Act. And while there are many 501c3s and other entities out there that have do wonderful work and have great project ideas, not all of those will be eligible under the Act. So we would recommend a fairly close reading and draw the line on eligibility pretty close to the text. So that would be our recommendation. And also then, as Joe stated, to do our due diligence to explore the professionalism and the track record of the entities that apply as well.
And then do you want to just quickly take us through a high-level overview of the actual eligible uses as well?
Absolutely. Under the Act, there are 4 categories of eligibility. 3 are included here on this handout. The one that is not included is lost revenue, which is available to the municipality or county. It would not be available to other non-governmental entities. The first I've listed here on the handout is investments to infrastructure. I understand that the county may use a different process to fund water projects in unincorporated areas, broadband, but there are a few categories of projects that would still be available to non-governmental entities in this section. For example, in Benton County, our office administered a septic remediation program for homes for low-income families in the unincorporated areas of the county. It was very successful. It was a project of about $200,000 through the health department, although there was a great deal of need. We could have funded that in a larger amount. That's an example. Also, there are some non-point source pollution mitigation programs that are eligible under that part of the Act. So while we wouldn't expect probably a huge influx of applications under that category, we did include it here. And then skipping to the end, premium pay also is available to private businesses and nonprofits. I'm not certain that we would see applications from that part of the community, but it is eligible. It would be up to the court to decide if that would be an aspect of the Act that would be open for application. Of course, all of these areas are, but I included it here because it is eligible and it would be for you to decide if those are the types of projects you would be interested in funding. The largest section that would be most likely to be applied for by non-governmental entities is the Public Health and Economic Impact section. And this is divided in the Act into two parts. One is responding to COVID-19, and one is, I believe, mitigating negative economic impacts. In responding to COVID-19, it's fairly self-explanatory. Really, these types of projects are meant to address the health issue of the pandemic. So here you'll find medical care expenses. Behavioral health care also is included here. Improvements to congregate settings. The jails would be included in this section, but in the non-governmental world, this would apply to nursing homes, schools, homeless shelters, and the like, places where people live in group housing. So particularly articulated is improvements to HVAC in those facilities. Perhaps it could be expanded to include adding area for separating COVID-positive people. There are other, this is not these are bullet points, so there's area for exploration in any of these topics, but those would be the types of applications that we anticipate you might see from the community there. There is a subcategory here to provide funding for groups that are disproportionately impacted under the healthcare section, and that broadens out quite a lot. One is and there is a documentation aspect to demonstrating that these people are disproportionately impacted. This goes as far afield as remediating lead paint in homes, encouraging healthy living environments in neighborhoods, things along those lines. There is a section of the Act that I don't think would apply to your application process for qualified census tracts that broadens quite broader than even this, where many different types of projects are included. However, I discovered that all of the qualified census tracts in Washington County are clearly within the boundaries of a municipality. So I'm not sure whether the court would be interested in opening the application to those types of projects, so I didn't include it here. The other section is responding to the negative economic impacts of COVID-19. And this broadens out quite a lot as well. While any project would need to demonstrate that it is proportionately responding to a harm caused by COVID-19, not to some other economic cause, the general headings are assistance to households. Some of these types of projects are already covered by other programs such as rental assistance. Job training is probably covered by another area. Legal aid to prevent eviction or homelessness. Emergency assistance for burials are some of the examples given in the Act. The next subheading is assistance to small businesses and nonprofits. And for a threshold eligibility requirement here is how that business has fared in comparison to other similar businesses. So again, that points toward demonstrating that this business was affected by COVID-19, not by some other very specific issue with that business. One of the examples that the fund could be used for is to bring their unemployment insurance trust up to pre-pandemic levels. So there are some specific examples, even loans to businesses. And the other is a specific carve out for tourism and hospitality industry. So there's quite a bit of room there specifically directed toward that area of the economy. So those are the three broad sections that could be areas of application, although, of course, the court is, it's your call on what types of applications you want to see under the Act. Again, I'll just emphasize two things. One, accountability falls to the county for every penny that is spent from this rescue plan fund. So every business, every 501c3 that receives funding from the county through this application process will be audited, and all of the findings will fall to the county. So keep that in mind. The second is that only projects that are eligible under the Act may be funded. There is some gray area, in depending on interpretation, but not as much as some people seem to think. So again, keep in mind that the project must be eligible and that the expenditures must be audit compliant to the level that the county would require if it were their own project.
I'll now open it up for questions from the court. Any questions on the eligibility and that piece? J.B. Lemming.
Sounds to me like we need to hire a lawyer just to get started.
And then would you tell us what you see the, I guess, structure of application process looking like if we were to move forward?
Sure. The way we envision that process at this point is that an applicant who would want to come to the county for funding would be directed to our website where we would have perhaps an FAQ, a matrix of eligibility that they can read through and see where their project would fit, reference to the Act so they can read the rules for themselves, and then the application itself, which would be, part of it would be contact information regarding the group that's applying. We would like to see audits. We would like to see financial records. We want to know who is their CEO, who is their treasurer, what's their track record, how long have they been around, what have they done, what other federal and state agencies have they received funding from, and how did that go. We would want to know what their impact is on unincorporated areas of the county and what general idea of the cost per beneficiary, which would be part of the evaluation process. Some projects are just going to be more expensive. Healthcare is more expensive than other projects, but that would be taken into consideration. Also, then we would want a lot of information about their proposed project. We would expect to see a detailed plan. If there's any construction or purchasing of equipment, we would want professional estimates to support their budget request. We would expect a level of professionalism that would speak to their capacity to properly administer the funds. Then, once those applications are completed and the application period is closed, we'll collect those and evaluate those on two criteria. One is eligibility per se. Is this project eligible? And we will cite to the rule about whether we think it is or is not eligible. And then we will evaluate the merits of the proposed project. So in that case, we can provide our scoring matrix and how that particular project scored, what its strengths and weaknesses are, and then it will be up to the court to decide which project should be approved.
J.P. Rio-Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It sounds like y'all have a really good handle on this, and I'm pleased to hear the level of scrutiny that you're proposing for the spending of these funds. Frankly, I know that the quorum court so far and the funds that have been spent out of the American Rescue Plan already have not received that level of scrutiny. But I'm pleased to hear that could be a part of this potential partnership. My question is, are y'all already working with other entities with their American Rescue Plan funds?
Yes, we are. So far, the projects that are under contract at this point are water and wastewater projects. It's the normal course of my day-to-day business to administer those projects. So we felt very comfortable, even though the final rule has not yet been published, to move ahead with water and wastewater rehabilitation projects. And we have those in several communities across Northwest Arkansas. We're also working with other counties, several, but for the counties, we're being a bit more cautious and asking them to wait until the final rule is published. Not every county in the state has an extensive staff to help them evaluate and review their proposed expenditures. So we're offering to step in that role for them, but would like a little more cover from the Treasury before we do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? JP Lemming.
If we come to y'all and y'all write a good plan out and you tell us it's going to be perfect, and at the end of the day, and it goes and they get funded and it comes back and it says county's going to have to pay it back, are y'all responsible for that or are we responsible for that? Where does that responsibility lie?
I understand your question. First of all, I will never tell you it's perfect. I'm an attorney, so I'll say it depends.
That's an attorney for you.
But second, we will propose that the county adopt certain compliance thresholds and monitor throughout, which I'm sure that the county is very capable and well practiced in doing. For example, one suggestion would be that the entity receiving a grant would place all of those funds in a freestanding checking account that would have no other funds involved. And every month, as that statement comes in, it's also submitted to the county. All of the records for any project will be completely open to the public. They're all FOIA-able, and the county, of course, would have equal access to those records. So building in bumpers along the way to make sure things aren't getting out of hand, and also placing in the contract with that entity to clearly spell out how those funds would be no longer made available if errors are discovered. Another would be, instead of writing a check to the entity and saying, go forth and do good, instead have them pay invoices as they come in. I don't know if that's something the county would want to fool with. That would be a lot of administration, but those are some examples of how the county can put in bumpers along the way to make sure things don't get out of hand before it's a real problem. As for liability, we do have liability insurance. I don't know if it would cover our recommendations. One of the arguments that the large consultant groups are making is that their liability insurance, if you get brought to task by the Treasury and asked to repay, then you can sue the consultant and they have the liability insurance to pay that. God forbid, first of all. But also, I hate to go out on a limb here, especially since this is a public meeting, but I feel fairly confident that with a rigorous application process paired off with rigorous ongoing contemporaneous compliance requirements by the county, that risk is not the monster under the bed that some of those entities out there are making it out to be, that are making recommendations that, well, they're not the risks that they have to be. Those can be minimized.
Okay, thank you. Brian, how many more attorneys do we need for the county? Thank you.
You're welcome.
JP Rio Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a follow-up question to the point that I brought up earlier. If we were to contract with y'all on this, would y'all be willing to go back and, I guess, examine some of the spending of the ARP funds that the county has already done so far?
Well, the short answer is yes. Joe was not willing to directly answer your question about our fees, but I will. We made a presentation to all of the county judges in our district months and months ago, listing our range of service fees from 1.5%, which we would anticipate for something like reviewing applications, to 5%, which we would anticipate for administering a project. We charge municipalities 7.5% to administer a construction project, which is what we're doing now with water and wastewater. So that gives you an idea of the range of our fees. Obviously, that would move us over into procurement land, so we would have to wait until the county were to procure us or some other agency. But, for example, to directly answer your question, if the county decided to allocate 10% of the ARP money from this year to non-governmental entities, our fee would fall under the $35,000 threshold. However, the safer route is to procure. That's totally up to you guys. I forgot the question. Sorry.
Oh, it was just about, just double checking the ARP spending that the quorum court has already appropriated so far as of this date. Just to, make sure that the, T's are crossed and the I's are dotted in terms of, because it sounds like y'all have a really good handle on what the eligibility is, and there's going to be final rules as well. And it would be better to know sooner rather than later if there was some issue.
I won't speak for Joe, but we would be interested in negotiating that.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much. Appreciate
Thank you.
your time.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Now to the fun part of discussion around the ARP funds to be made available to non-government requests. So this is where we as the court have really a couple decisions to make, and that's essentially setting a guideline for how much of the $23 million we want to set aside as being made available for non-government. And the second piece is either setting a minimum or maximum or both for applications. And I'll speak to that second part on the setting a minimum. What we don't want to happen is to have $10,000, $1,000 applicants. That's going to be extremely costly and extremely time consuming to hear and have all those applications vet with how extensive the application process is. So the goal would be to set a minimum that is at least going to be able to fund not necessarily a significant project, but a larger project that will be a good investment of time from reviewing and vetting the application. So with that, I would like to open up the first piece of the discussion around how much money to set aside specifically to non-government request. So I'll open the floor now to talk to the non-government piece. JP Madison.
I guess it sort of depends. I mean, I think that we really have to sort of talk about the county's priorities. We've heard jail, we've heard JDC. I think water is very important to put in there. And then I think having a service like this is very helpful. But I have a hard time saying I only think we should allot this amount to external until I sort of understand what the county's priorities are. Because candidly, I think that county priorities should come first. I think that, there's a lot of need, period. But this money is coming to the county. The accountability falls to the county. And so I think we should sort of prioritize what it is we want to do and then see, okay, what's left, or do we want to reprioritize that? I think it goes back to that question we always have, how much money should be in our reserves? I have no idea. What's the magic number, right? We could sit there and debate all day what's the right number. I'd like to see a portion of it go to non-governmental requests, but at the same time, I think until we know our priorities and frankly what comes in, I think we could all probably be convinced by something we hadn't thought of that comes in as an application. So I know it's not much of an answer, Mr. Chairman, and I'm very glad that you've included all of us in this process, but I just kind of say I'd have to wait and see. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. That's very helpful. JP Deakins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess what I'm kind of hearing is our criteria on this might change over time, right? The initial applications I would think would deal more with emergency needs. And then over time, as we move in more into next year, it might be more long-term, sustainable projects. So my next question would be, we want to set aside what I would think would be something substantial, but also, we could fund this into the future, right? I mean, what you decide now, you could add to it later, right? I mean, we put together, we've set aside $1 million, then we set the criteria, and then at the first part of next year, we've exhausted that because there's been so much demand and projects approval. We could, assuming we still had the funds, we could set more aside for that, right? I mean, it's I guess what I'm trying to say is not like one bite at this apple and it's done. I mean, we could work through this process into the future.
Absolutely. And the idea, too, is this wouldn't be an appropriation, so the money will stay in the line item it's in. It's more of a discussion from the court to have an idea of how much we want to make available.
Yeah, but I think it's more of a bookmark, so we're committing ourselves to at least this, and we don't spend that, and then, right. I mean, that's the way I picture it in my head, and I'm just looking for somebody to.
Absolutely. And I think if, say we set, just use your example of $1 million, if $1 million was the magic number we set aside and we get 2 applications for $50,000, then obviously we're going to have $900,000 left over. We could pull that back and use it for government funding. So I really just wanted to have the discussion point to hear from my colleagues in the court as to what would make sense as a kind of a starting point for the project as we start to consider funding. And then the second piece to that is really around a minimum for the application. And just to give my perspective is I met with the group, Northwest Arkansas Economic Development District, as I heard about projects they have ongoing and with different areas. To me, $50,000 made sense as kind of a starting point, so that it's not the death by 1,000 paper cuts of so many applications.
And I would think we would take their recommendation on that because I have no perspective on what a minimum dollar value. What does that pull in applications? I would completely rely on their experience in that arena. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, J.P. Deakins. J.P. Pond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm recalling one of our court members bringing up a thing that could happen if we don't know what all the rules are yet or what the criteria is. And we may have someone coming to us and saying, this really didn't qualify, you got to pay this back. Okay. I'm very uncomfortable with starting to distribute money to non-government entities until we know what the rules are and what the criteria is. It feels a little different if we spent the money on something that's governmental and they said, well, that didn't qualify, y'all have to pay that yourself before I do an NGO. And that's just where I am on that I'm uncomfortable with that. And so I'm kind of uncomfortable with deciding some amount. We do need to wait and see, what the rules are going to be. Thank you.
Thank you, J.P. Pond. And that's the piece I'm not sure if anyone knows the answer to that, when the final ruling will be out. Would love to know that, but I think that's the big question mark in the air. And so do we postpone until final ruling is heard? Or I think the tentative timeline from talking to the judge's office was to try and get an application out and available by November 1 and allow a 6-week application process for non-government to be closed on December the 10th. And so that would allow us to then review those. We'd have some time for those to be vet through as eligible or not. And then it would probably be the February, either this meeting or a special quorum court meeting, that we would actually hear those applications. So that's a tentative timeline that we've talked through. I have no idea when these official guidelines will be placed. So maybe it is, do we sit on our hands until those are available? And review first the county infrastructure, county essential services that we need to look at first before moving along with opening an application process. So I apologize, thinking out loud here as we try and work through this, but wanted to at least start the conversation tonight. JP Ustry.
Thank you very much. I wonder if Mr. Willis could give us an idea of the size grants that they normally process, and that might help us a little bit with this. Thank you.
Yes, sir. We don't typically administer these grants or grants of this small size in the $50,000 range. We have done some of those from state money. AEDC gets money from the federal government. They also have some state funds, and they will issue grants as small as $15,000, and we have done some of those, but those are typically to cities or counties. So this is a little bit different arena here where you're talking about non-governmental entities. And so our grants are generally larger, and they're usually to cities or counties.
So just a follow-up question. So do you have a recommendation or what, in your mind at least, would make it so that it's worth our time, it's sustainable, and yet, it's something that we don't want to leave people out there on the lower?
Frankly, that's a very, very tough question because it's predicated on what the general feeling of the court is as to what constituency you're trying to reach. So if you set it at $50,000, for instance, you may be eliminating some organizations that really need the money, and that's just beyond their capacity. However, at the same time, that does establish a higher level of accountability from them if they're able to manage those funds properly. Then you're talking about a $50,000 threshold that might be exactly what you're looking for. So while we've not, ARP is new. We've obviously, clearly, that's something we've never done, and I'd like to follow up on a comment, if I may, in just a moment on that. But so we don't have any background in this area at all because this is all uncharted waters. I think anything less than 25, frankly, you're probably not going to get the efficiency out of it. It's just going to be a challenge to administer. Whether that number is 35, 45, 50 is just really at the general pleasure of the court.
And then just one more question, that is that while we're still looking for the final rules to come out, I think a number of these projects will clearly fit within the rules. I mean, I don't think they're going to change enough to rule out some things that are obvious. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, it is, and that's a great segue to the comment I wanted to make was while the final rules are not out and we've been told by Treasury a number of different target dates, those dates have not been met. So frankly, we have no idea when that's going to be. We thought they might be out by September 30th, and they haven't. We don't anticipate a significant sea change in what those rules are. I think there may be a little tweaking here or there, but we don't really see a drastic deviation from what has actually been published to this point. They've received hundreds of thousands of comments on this interim final rule, and I think some of those may make their way into that, but if anything, it will probably more than likely broaden some categories, some things that they had been asked about to include. One of the particular ones was volunteer firefighters. When you get into trying to figure out how to pay premium pay, they didn't fit the categories that they established. So there was a lot of push for that, for how do we try to figure out a way to compensate firefighters who are not on a regular payroll. So Treasury seems to have taken that seriously. We hope to see maybe a specific point to deal with things of that sort. So I don't think we're going to see a severe tightening. I think we'll see maybe a broadening to be sure that they color in some lines on some areas that they hadn't already spoken to. And I will say, if I may, that as opposed to any other federal grant that you see out there, this is new. And what you don't have is you don't have a final arbiter. You don't have a federal agency that says yes, no. And so that's why no one can get entirely comfortable with this whole thing. I think it's fair to say that the riskiest piece of it is the NGO. You know, the governmental piece of it is pretty structured and it's pretty solid. So it's a risk that you take when you get into this. Clearly, Treasury wanted to, and Congress wanted some money to be spent in this area. That's why they allowed it there. But it is a little dicey, and it's something you just have to evaluate the risk of it. But as opposed to any other federal grant we work with, have ever worked with, where you go to the agency and you just say, here's an application for this project. Is this approved or is it not approved? And you have a negotiation back and forth about, well, maybe the amount you asked for is a little less. We want you to tweak this or that. And in the end, we say yes, and it gets a stamp of approval. There is no agency here that's going to say that is approved, that is eligible, or it is ineligible. So that's the challenge with ARP, is all of us out here who are trying to assist counties and cities with this, we all face that position of not being able to go to any federal agency and get a yes/no answer. The best we can do is just tell you, based on the rules as they're written, this is an eligible use as best we can determine it. And some of those are very cut and dried. We're not ever going to get a yes/no.
Thank you, sir. JP Johnson, I saw you had your mic hot earlier.
I did, but I had to turn it off so I could hear.
Okay.
If we're thinking out loud, I'm going to get real crazy here. We've been hearing about the final rules forever. If they're ever finalized, it's probably going to take 3 or 4 or 5 times that long to get them interpreted. And guys, that's way in the future sometimes. So it looks to me like we've either got to say we're going to sit on it or we're going to be pioneers. And I've only been in business 60 years. I've never made a dime as a pioneer. So this is tough.
It's one of the reasons I invited all you smart people this evening, and thankful you're here. I think JP Deakins and then JP Rio Stafford.
I'm not going to follow that up. I'm going to let that.
Fair enough. JP Rio Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's starting to sound to me like we need to do some risk analysis, basically. So, if whatever we put toward NGOs shouldn't be more than we're willing to eat if we have to, if something comes back that it was spent the wrong way and the county ends up having to eat the money, I think initially probably we shouldn't, put more into that pot than we can afford to put in that pot, I guess is what I'm saying.
Was that something you'd like for me to respond to? Okay, maybe to. I'm sorry, I just didn't want to be presumptuous. I would correlate that to maybe a bank loaning money. If you loan $1 million to a business, that's obviously something that's a lot of scrutiny is paid to, and clearly it should be. If you spread that $1 million among 100 or 1,000 businesses, your risk of loss is spread tremendously. So more than likely, out of those, I think statistically, historically, all of that, it's fair to say that your risk of loss among all of those is going to be very, very small. So while if you were going to send that to one entity, $2 million, $3 million, whatever it is, yes, by all means, you need to really do some serious analysis. If you're going to spread that pretty thin, then I think the rules are pretty clear. I think Katherine was on point with that this is not as gray as it may seem to a lot. There are a lot of just really cut and dried black and white, and we don't anticipate those changes being significant in the final rule.
JP Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's what I was going to say. So Treasury actually put out a statement last week saying that if your expenditure was consistent with the interim final rule, but it was somehow inconsistent with the final rule, you were okay. So and I think what I've heard you say is we expect it to get broader, not necessarily narrower, but in the odd event that there was some tweak that you were covered by the interim final rule and then not covered by the final rule, they've said that's fine. We support you in that case. So I think that we can feel, at least on their interim final rule, going forward safely on some things. I think we should start discussing county priorities and the application process because it may take a while. They got 1,000 comments and they have to respond to each one. And I'm being told that they probably needed 3 years to write this rule and do it well, and they clearly have a whole lot less time than that. So I think that we should go forward and follow the advice. We shouldn't spend all 46 million in one place because of the risk, but I think that once we start dividing it up and prioritizing, as long as it's consistent with the interim final rule, I think we can feel assured. But I will say that I think that if we're looking at very large expenditures, I think it will help to have the consultant that has the liability insurance. Just because of the risk, I'd hate to spend $10 million and have to pay that back. Spending $20,000 and having to pay that back, that's different. But once we're starting to look at very large chunks on one thing, unless we can see it in black and white in the rule, I think we probably need to get some help navigating it. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your comments. JP Lemming.
Sam, ain't they some of this money that we've got to get spent by December? If we don't, we're going to have to send it back this year.
That would probably be a better question for our county attorney, but my understanding is that would be the rental assistance,
that $7 million that we got. We spent about 3.5.
Yeah, two separate.
But still, yeah, that's a thought that we need to be thinking about. If it needs to be happening somehow, if we need to be working on that. What's that? I've been told on that $7 million, the rental stuff, that the judges, like the Fayetteville housing, Springdale housing, we've spent like 3.5. Is that so? By December, it's got to be spent of this year?
There are certain parts of it. We had to meet a threshold, which we've met, so we don't have to return any of it early. So we have until the end of the year. By the end of the year, most likely we're going to be out of the initial amount. We'll be into that second ARP amount that's coming in. But they've extended the deadlines on those because of the issues with getting the money out.
Okay. What we're talking about on like the other money, the 46 million, I've talked to Josh Moore, and he says Washington Water Authority could spend every bit of that in the rural waters if they wanted to. And if you'll look at your Washington County Road Department, if you'll look at the bridge inspections, we could spend every bit of it. Washington County Road Department's just rebuilding your bridges and the infrastructure in Washington County. So it would be, just a flip of a switch, we could have it all spent tomorrow. So I guess we just need to back up and really think about what we really want to spend it on, because helping our volunteer fire departments is a big step, because you're helping everybody in the whole Washington County, not just a small group. You're helping everyone. So we just really need to do our pencil work and figure out where we really want to spend it. Thank you.
Thank you. So the way I see it, we have two options, and we need to make a decision. First being, do we want to open the application process and we can hold on that until the final ruling is made, or we can go out on a limb and risk issuing funds before the final ruling? Or option two is to table this for the non-government until the final ruling is made and we've determined how we want to go about funding essential county services. So I would entertain a motion from a committee member.
Move to table the NGO part of it until we find out what the rules are going to be.
I have a motion by JP Pond. Do I hear a second? And I have a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. So we will move on to agenda item number 8. Agenda item number 8 is an ordinance appropriating $4.7 million from the American Rescue Plan Act Fund 3046 to pass through payments line item in the 2021 American Rescue Plan Act budget for the Washington County Rural Fire Association.
Mr. Chairman, can I just say, I've been talking to the Rural Fire Association some today and about this, and we can confirm it with them, but I think their thought was that they would like to table this for 60 days. They've learned more about the American Rescue Plan. I think sitting here tonight, they've thought more about it. I think we all want to support the Rural Fire Association. They just want to do what's best for them. But like I said, they can confirm that, and that's would be my suggestion to you guys.
Thank you. Someone want to speak to that? Okay. Do I hear a motion from?
Move to table until next meeting, is that?
We have a motion and a second to table item number 8, and I believe I heard 60 days. JP Pine, will you clarify?
Is 60 days what they wanted? Yes or no? Okay, I see bobbling heads. Okay, 60 is good.
Okay, so I don't know that it'll be 60 days on the dot, so is it okay if we call it the December County Services meeting?
That would be good.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor to table item number 8 until... Absolutely.
For the sake of discussion, now we're discussing. Somebody want to come and talk to us?
John, can I say something right quick? I think it's important to come and let the quorum court know how important and what we're trying to buy is. The air packs, the whole thing of the picture. That's what we really need, because there's some of them on here don't have a clue what an air pack is, and it would be good to explain to them.
You guys are certainly prepared to share that information and provide that awareness.
Okay, thank you.
Do that tonight.
So good evening. My name is Willie Watts. I've been a firefighter here in Washington County since 1994. So I've been around for a little while in the fire service. After listening to the discussion this evening, it sounds like we probably do need to, or y'all need to make several decisions on how you want to spend money and how it needs to go. But one of the things we did is, as a fire association, as the Washington County Fire Association, is we recognized that there was some funding available that potentially could help us out with some things that we found that were really, really hard to achieve due to the cost. And so I know it's a relatively large number that we've come forward with you. Brought forward is about $5 million. But we did a lot of legwork on this, and what we did was, just like someone mentioned earlier, was we did a needs survey across all the departments to kind of see what was out there and what we thought we needed, and we wanted something that would improve the interoperability of all the departments. As each of you know, it takes all of our departments to mitigate a lot of emergencies. There's no longer do you see one department on the scene of an incident. You see multiple departments. Many, sometimes up to 5 or 6 departments across our county, working the same incident to try to mitigate that. So interoperability is probably one of our most important things that we took out of this. And something else that we looked at was we wanted something that would reach out and touch our communities and the citizens of our communities, literally. Everyone across Washington County would benefit from something like this. We wanted something that specifically benefited our firefighters and improved the well-being and safety of them. We wanted something that would greatly enhance safety across the board, whether it be airway protection via these SCBAs or self-contained breathing apparatuses, or accountability. And so we weighed these things into our proposal. Something that was easily sustainable, something that we could manage the program on, that was easily manageable and had a long lifespan, something that we could bring forward that may last us. We weren't coming to you and proposing something that would need replacing in 3 to 5 years. This is something that would last, up to 20 years. And something that could truly be used for COVID response, because I think that realistically is what these funds were put in place for. Something that most of our departments needed, yet probably will never be able to afford to replace. They're just so expensive, these particular pieces of equipment. One of the things that we looked at specifically with our self-contained breathing apparatus, which is the proposal that we come forward for you to look at, was the NFPA standards. And most of the SCBAs across the county, and those SCBAs are used for respiratory protection. When you go into fires or any type of atmosphere that may have a harmful emission, those are used to protect the firefighters' airways. One of the things we looked at was, compatibility across the departments was super important to us. And for each department to be able to not only use each other's equipment, but be able to blend those pieces of equipment together so that each one of us had that interoperable piece. Most of that equipment across the county, those SCBA's, they no longer meet the standard. And so what we looked at was the current National Fire Protection Standard is a 2018 standard. Most of those SCBA's meet a 2000 standard, but none of them, I believe across the county when we did the survey, there was 3 of them in the county that met the 2018 standard. The rest of them fell below that standard, well below that standard as a matter of fact. What we looked at was about each department. We took a survey across the departments to kind of see what was out there and what they needed. NFPA recommends, they have a recommended amount of firefighters that need to assemble on a structure fire scene or any other type of incident, large-scale incident, and it's about 17 to 20 firefighters. And so we used that number to kind of compile our numbers to see where we kind of needed to be for these, and split them up equally across the county so that they're all areas of the county had these. And one of the other things that we really we wanted to look at was accountability. And so accountability became pretty important to us. And as each of you know, a lot of our responders are responding in the middle of the night from their homes. And a lot of times it's hard to track them, whether they actually are there. And, they would physically have to walk up to somebody and say, knock on the window of a car and say, hey, I'm here, So we wanted to be able to account for all our people. And so technology in these SCBA's allows for the accountability portion of it. I mean, it allows us to account for our people, to kind of see where they're at moving around the fire ground. And God forbid, if something were to happen, a catastrophic event, a collapse or anything of that nature, we'd be able to locate those firefighters. And so you see, we took a lot of care and time into putting this proposal together to kind of see where we were at and to kind of see what we could bring forward that was sustainable for the county, that was somewhat affordable in the act, and that somewhat fit the overall rule that we've seen so far. So, does anybody have any questions or comments or anything?
JP Lemming?
That the piece that he's talking about on accountability is Willie is the good Lord blessed him because he fell through a 2-story floor at a big burning house in Prairie Grove. There's probably 40 firefighters there. We had a big fire. And luckily, we knew where he was at, and luckily we could get to him. And he could have burned up just as easy as he lived there. But this piece on this air pack they're talking about, if that happened to happen again and they had the piece, they could walk right to him. It'll show you exactly where he's at. What he's talking about is a very, very important piece to all. And when he's talking about fire departments, we're talking about all 22 of them or 21 of them. And we're talking about touching everybody and saving lives, because that's what it's going to do. It's going to save a lot of lives. And I'm going to say this because the fact is, I've been in this business 40 years, and all of us old-timers, guys that know better, that guys that's been there, we're getting a lot of young rookies that want to be heroes. And guys, it's going to get somebody hurt. But that's not our fault. We're growing old. We got to get out, and the new boys has got to come in. And so you need to think of the younger generation while you're thinking on all this, because it's getting tough out there, and it's getting tough to keep them safe. And this is one piece of the tool that we really need to keep them safe. It's just a really a neat deal. And Willie has, he's talked about fire departments, and there's so many of this that jump up at, all these city folks love to go to Devil's Den and go hiking, and they'll have to get out there and they'll fall off the cliff. And so there's at least 40 of us jump up, we run to Devil's Den to go save their little hides. But the accountability, it's hard to get out there in the woods. We had an airplane crash down there in the Strickler area. And when you get out there in them woods trying to find people and find things, it's not easy. So I would really like for y'all to think about this, and it's a very, very important piece, and the CARES money is there for us to use for stuff like this, and so I'm really, really hope we think about it and we get it done for them. Thank you.
Thank you, JP Lemming. I'm one of those that like to go out and hike Devil's Den, so I'd appreciate if you rescue me. So thank you for you guys. JP Dennis.
I would just like to say thank you to all 4 of you and all your departments. can't thank you enough. I've lived it, and you know that I've lived it. And thank you for all that you do. And the other thing, I know that we've tabled it, but just since we're discussing it, what I see is so many people are moving off the grid farther and farther and farther out into the county. Well, that means it takes longer to get a fire department there or someone there, and the fire is going to be bigger. And if people need to be rescued, they need every piece of equipment that they need at their, every one of them need it in order to go in to save someone out of a house. And you say, well, Robert, you're old, but what about my grandkids? I've got 16 of them, and I'd certainly want them to be able to go in a house and get those kids out. And they're all different houses. Don't misunderstand. They don't all live one house. But I meant, the chances of it happening to you, you think is very small, but it's happened to me twice. Big fires. And these gentlemen and Willie and both John all came. They all came. And when it happens to you, you realize it can happen to anybody, and it can happen quickly. Fires double and double and double, just about as quick as I said that. They just double so fast. And when you really experience a large fire, then you understand that they have to have this equipment. So I'll be voting for it whenever it's voted on. And, but if you want it tabled, I'm all for tabling it. Thank you.
Well, I just feel like, there's a lot of decisions that obviously sitting here tonight and listening, that there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. The Quorum Court has a pretty big shirt to wear there. And so I know there's a lot of folks that are going to be coming forward, and a lot of different organizations and non-governmental and governmental both. And so we wanted to bring to you something that was sustainable, something that would not only enhance the safety of our citizens that live and visit our communities, but it enhances our firefighters. That's like these two gentlemen have said, they're very limited anymore. There's not that many of them out there. And we want to do everything we possibly can to enhance the safety for those individuals that are willing to get up in the middle of the night and volunteer their time and come serve the communities.
J.P. Simons.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Willie, for being here. I'm a visual person, so I'd like to schedule some time to come out there and see one of these. Most definitely. See how it's used, see kind of real-world application. But since we are discussing it, how many of these units are we looking at, and what kind of cost per unit? Well, and does that change depending on the size and the capacity of the different fire departments, or is that pretty much a set standard? This is a cost per unit, and they're all going to be relatively the same.
And there is a cost per unit in a lot of times in an order to determine that cost per unit, especially when you're dealing with a great deal of them, you've just about got to bid them, and see where that price comes in. But an approximate cost per unit is probably around 12 to 13,000, somewhere right in there per unit. And so what we did was the SCBA is one component of this, and so that piece of equipment requires several other pieces of equipment to make it function. And so that self-contained breathing apparatus has a bottle on the back of it that's much like the bottle that you're drinking water of right now, but it's full of air. And so you need a couple of those spare per SCBA. That SCBA also has a face piece that's associated with it, so that good air can get into your lungs and it protects your face. That piece is also a component. And so once you add all those components in there, you're in the upwards of $15,000 a unit. And not to mention, with the NFPA standards, technology and the advancement in technology made changes that don't allow them to be backwards compatible. And so what that means is the ones going forward don't play well with the ones that we currently have. And so that's one of the other things that we really weighed in heavily to this, is we were able to say, hey, what can we replace? You know, if we were to replace 5 SCBA, well, that 5 SCBA only will work with each other. They will no longer work with the others, so that weighed in. So to answer your question, there's somewhere in the round of $15,000 a piece. There's somewhere around 40 of them per department, not to mention SCBA bottles and masks. And we do have exact numbers that are out there, you know, and so when we surveyed the departments, that's kind of the average that we came up with to come up with this. And also included in that is right at about $200,000 for the accountability system. And one of the things that's unique about this particular accountability system is it would allow us to cross those jurisdictional lines and still be compatible with each other. And so, if you will, if Lincoln Fire Department responded to Nob Hill, Nob Hill's accountability system would be the same that Lincoln used, and as soon as Lincoln breached that boundary and came to that particular fire, then Nob Hill would be able to see those individuals from Lincoln, and they would fall right into their accountability system. And obviously everything is technological driven. It would probably be an app on your phone or some sort of a tablet that would run that. And so that's one of the other costs associated with this specific proposal. But we'd be more than happy to bring, you know, I'm cautious about bringing vendors in, but I would be more than happy to bring something that we currently have operating in and let you know, look that over and show you, you know, exactly what features and things that we're looking at improving.
And just as a follow-up question, for my clarification, we're talking about all departments in Washington County,
That
not
is correct.
just...
That is correct, and one of the reasons that we looked at across the board at all departments is like I mentioned earlier, you know, we used to have, such as blocks in the floor, jurisdictional boundaries, and generally we didn't cross over those boundaries. But what happens now is those boundaries are almost wiped away. It is not uncommon to see, I'll give you an example that happened just last week. It's not uncommon to see Round Mountain, Elkins, Goshen, Nob Hill, and even Springdale Fire Department assigned to the same fire and assisting one another. Because remember, you know, we have jurisdictional placements of fire stations all around the area. And sometimes, much like school districts, those boundaries don't necessarily match that school, if you will. And so, you know, Springdale School District, prime example, they have schools that are built right on the boundary of the Fayetteville and Springdale School District, yet someone across the street goes to Fayetteville, the other side of the street goes to Springdale. And so we do that same thing in the fire service, where we respond, or we try to respond, with the closest fire station or agency that we can. And so that causes a lot of cross-jurisdictional work.
Are there departments right now that have the capacity to purchase these systems and they just haven't? Or is there a reason why
I don't know.
Limited on the capacity right now?
I don't know of any department. You know, most of the fire departments that have an operational budget, if they have employees, it's much like a county operational budget. The majority of your operational budget is paying a wage or a salary. And so you would be probably super surprised to know what the actual operational budget of those departments would be. And some of them, you know, even some of the larger departments, and I'll use, I'll pick on Bill Hellard. He's the chief of the Farmington City Fire Department and Volunteer Fire Department. What is your operational budget outside your employee expense? Maybe just so $70,000 per year he has to operate his fire department on. That's to purchase equipment, to buy uniforms, to buy personal protective equipment, to buy fuel. And so, I mean, it's a very limited amount that we actually are operating off of. So no, the answer is probably not. And that's why we looked at the ARP funding for this specific thing, is we knew that really and truly this is something that, yes, if we set up some sort of a capital program and looked out 10 or 15 years, yeah, we probably could replace them. But in reality, you know, there's going to be other needs that arise, and chances are you're going to need a fire truck by then, and everyone knows those are, you know, the bigger part of $500,000 now. And so, you know, I would say that yes, there's some creative measures to fund this, but realistically, probably not. And that's the reason it hasn't been funded. Remember, I said earlier on that most of these don't meet the standard, that most of them meet the 2000 standard, and there's a whole host of them that meet the 1994 standard.
Thank you.
You bet.
JP Deacons.
Let me follow up on that. That sounds like a wonderful opportunity for some of our larger municipalities that received some ARPA money to maybe partner with us to cover some of these costs.
100%, and we have brought that forward as well. So, you know, like I said, it's not a total replacement of every air pack in the county. It's a total replacement of the majority of the air packs in the departments, but it will take a partnership from Fayetteville, Springdale, Farmington, places of that nature to make this thing successful. Because what I said was, once you buy one, you just about have to buy them all.
Gotcha.
You don't really have a choice, and so because they're just not backwards compatible any longer.
Thanks,
yes,
sir.
you can.
So, along with that, part of the process is we have trucks that we take to fill the breathing apparatus. We have equipment in our stations to do that. So part of the cost of switching over is going to be replacing those type of things also. So, you know, the cities are going to eat some of that, trying to get the logistical type of things going. So there's a lot more cost than just the air packs to the program. And I think part of that is going to be eaten by the cities to replace those air compressors in those trucks and things like that. So there's a lot to it. We can't do it one air pack at a time. We have to do it all at once to make sure that if I go into a fire and Willie's beside me and he's from Fayetteville and I'm from Farmington and somebody's there from Lincoln, if I run out of air, I need to be able to hook to his air pack and pull myself out and get us out of there. So we all have to have it the same way at the same time, and without this one lump sum, we're not able to do that. So, thank you.
JP Lemming.
I just want to add a little more to it. They was mentioning some smaller face people has to have special masks.
That's correct.
Some of the ladies has to have special masks. I mean, it's just what it is. Because in our department, we kind of try to buy one size fit all, but it does, but it don't. So therefore, you have to rearrange, and especially guys with beards and stuff, it don't work good. There's special stuff for y'all to do that. You can grease it, Vaseline it, and go on, but there's other issues. And some of our cities has went to like what they call a 4,500 pound bottle, which is like scuba divers use. And a lot of fire departments our bottles is 2,500. And then you go back to Farmington's, they got what they call an air service truck, which goes to wherever, and they can fill all of our bottles. They can sit there and we can run bottles all day long. But if theirs is set up for 4,500, then they can't fill it. If they're for 2,500, they can't fill our 4,500. So what we're trying to do is get this whole big circle to where everybody matches. So it's very important to get it all together. And like we said, when it's time to do it, it's time to do it all instead of try to piecemeal it together. Because I can tell you, Lincoln's budget, we got like. When I was the chief, we had probably in the neighborhood of a $40,000, $50,000 a year personnel budget, and we had our rural side had about $136,000. Well, I bought a 2010 fire truck. Took me 8 years to save the money, and I give almost $500,000 for it. So to say the fire departments can go shell out $12,000, $15,000 for 40 air packs, we'd have to go borrow the money, put the fire department in debt. I mean, it all falls back to we, the people, the taxpayers, is going to pay it all, no matter what. So I think we're all on the right track. Thank you.
You bet. JP Lemming. JP Esther, I see your mic queued. Before we do that, I do have a motion on the floor to table until the December meeting. I have a second. I don't know that we voted on that motion. Okay. So we do need to vote on that. JP Esther, I'll let you make your comment, and then we're going to vote on that motion.
It's just a real quick question. I think I know the answer, but I just want to be sure, and that is, I would assume that these will make you compatible with the cities, with Fayetteville and Springdale.
Yeah,
in the
and-
large departments.
Yes, sir, and Fayetteville and Springdale are also included, a portion of theirs are included in this. And like I said earlier, you know, Fayetteville Fire Department, I can't speak for Springdale, but I can for the city of Fayetteville. Fayetteville responded, they respond on average about three times a week into the county, on structure fire calls. And some of them are legitimate, some of them are not, obviously. But that's that interoperability piece. I mean, once again, you know, the jurisdictional boundary thing of Fayetteville, Farmington, Round Mountain, and Elkins, it just does not exist in the fire service anymore. It really takes all of the agencies, you know, to be able to be successful and to truly not put our responders in jeopardy. I mean, that's the number one thing that we're looking at is something that is responder safety, you know, with this specific purchase. One other thing we did look at, and just a little side note here, is we did look at the sustainability of this program. And these things generally, like any other component or piece of equipment that's this pricey, sometimes maintenance and upkeep on them is as well. And so the manufacturer that we currently use, you know, going forward, you know, they have a lifetime warranty on their product. And so, and that would ease some of our maintenance costs on these and going forward. And so it would be the responsibility of the fire association or the department to maintain that specific piece of equipment as well as maintain the upkeep and testing on it. So,
Mr. Watts, thank you so much for your time.
You bet.
I'd just like to say one more thing on what he's talking about. These air packs, NFPA is National Fire Protection Association. And it may change, but right now that bottle's only good for 10 years.
That is
You can only
correct.
test it a couple of times. So that bottle has to be replaced. So there's a lot of fire departments in which Lincoln's, we've chunked a bunch and bought a bunch just because we had to. I'm pretty stubborn, don't want to throw them away because they still work. But anyway, but the sad thing about that is if you got an air pack on somebody's back and they get hurt in that fire, that board, whatever department it is, they're going to get sued out to wazoo because, and that's the same as our bunker gear. Our bunker gear costs us about $8,000 to put a set of bunker gear on every firefighter that comes in the door. And 10 years, it's obsolete. And so it costs a lot of money when you deal with fire. Thank you, I'm done.
Thanks, JP Lemming. All right, we're going to vote on the motion. The motion is to table until the December meeting. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to item number 9 that was added, the JP Dennis.
I'll be quick, but at the same time, it's very important, I think. Of course, I'm going to say this little one, just it'll make you smile. It's a free program. It won't cost anything. So you say, how's that? I'll explain. The road department morale is terrible. Tell it like it is. I'll be brief and I'll be short, but I'll tell you flat out just real quick. It's terrible, and the reason it's terrible is everybody's quitting. 17 have quit, and they're quitting because they don't make enough money, and they can make more money other places. And consequently, we're running out of people to run road graders and put in tiles and do the work that's needed for the whole county. And so, since there is and has been so many people not working, there's a lot of there's money in the unappropriated funds for the county or for the road department that were for salary that have not been spent. So I think it's urgent that we take that unappropriated funds and, for simple math and simple thought, if you took that money and gave everybody in the road department $1 an hour raise and spent that money that way, it would help a lot in keeping people until we could get our salaries corrected and get them a decent wage. But when you print these out and look at what people are making, $13.17 for a heavy-duty equipment operator, and I won't use Willie, I'll use my son-in-law. He pays an average of $25 an hour for that job. we pay an average of $13.17 or a starting salary. And then we give them just a percentage raise, which I'm totally against. And I've said it over and over and over again, and I know you're tired of hearing it, but when you give 3% of $13, it's not very much. Give me 3% of $100,000, that's pretty good. But until we get these brackets corrected and everything, if we don't do something immediately, we're going to lose another 17, and we're going to shut it down because there's going to be no one there to do the work. And it costs us as citizens so much money to go on these roads. I lost the bottom of my Honda this weekend, kind of, sort of. I mean, I hit high center so many times that I couldn't believe it going down a county road. And it's really becoming serious out there, and it's our job, one of our most important jobs. And when you look at what the law says that we're to do, we're roads and bridges and jails, and we're letting these things go. And so that's my proposal. Why couldn't we take that money that was going to someone who was working? Not to name names, but we had a chief of staff that was empty for a long time. So if you got $62,000 sitting there, that's going to go back. They can't touch it. They can't reach in there and get that money unless we tell them they can have it. But if you took that $62,000, if that's what it is, and then that would be $1 an hour for 62,000 hours. And so it was already going to be spent on the road department, but because people quit, that money's not being used. And so I think we could take care of a big morale problem. And also, we spend money to help people in lots of different ways, this county, socially. If you're making $13 an hour and still working, it says a lot for you, because you can make $13 an hour sitting at home and having your rent paid, your food brought to you, and, you know, these people are down there working. They started. I thought I'd go down there this morning and be real smart. I had to get up at 5 to get down there in time. They were all ready to go at 6 o'clock. And not many people would do that for $13 an hour. And, you know, and it goes on from there. You realize that a mechanic has to buy his own tools? And if he breaks his tools while he's working for the county, who replaces those broken tools? Do you know? The employee. We don't even pay for their tools. And, you know, I guess when you get out and go down and look and see, and then think about the work, how hard it is, and the weather, how many of you are going to volunteer to take those 17? Hey, we've got 15 sitting here normally. The 15 of us, with the climate change and all the bad weather that's going to come this winter, the 15 of us can go drive the road graders. So come down and let's all learn how.
Thank you, JP. Dennis, I encourage you to put together an ordinance that helps support your proposal. And second, and that probably would make sense to go through personnel or budget and finance.
Well, it just all came to my mind, or to my attention today.
And also encourage you to.
And I want to share it with everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me share it, and I'll bring an ordinance as soon as I can find someone to write it for me.
Awesome. All right, that brings us to item number 10, which is public comment. Open up the floor for public comment. 12 minutes, 3 minutes per person. Please state your name and where you're from.
Josh Moody, Fayetteville. I'll be quick because I know we're all ready to get out of here. I just want to let you know that I think this meeting's been awesome, and I'm all warm and fuzzy inside. Thank you, Chairman Duncan, for providing the space to allow for an official discussion about ARP funds. That's a great first step. I think I agree with just about everything I've heard tonight. So I feel good about where we're headed, so thank you for that. I'd like to thank these gentlemen. I think the firefighter thing is definitely worthwhile exploring further. My son just yesterday in an unrelated conversation said that he plans to be a volunteer firefighter as soon as he can, which is much, much sooner than you might think. So anyway, thank you all. I think this was a great meeting, so thanks. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Moody. Public comment.
Beth Koger, Fayetteville, and I want to thank you too for having these discussions tonight. It's been wonderful to sit here and listen. And a lot of things that have come up, we've talked about sustainability, and I just want to bring to the court's attention that if you really want to see sustainability, let's use this money, let's talk to help the community, to address things like, my glasses, here we go. I have made a list of some things that I think would really be sustainable. Is we help families, if we address job training, if we help small businesses, establish high-quality child care, address mental health treatment, behavioral health, food insecurity, housing insecurity, diversion programs and sobering centers. And we were talking about a lot also about what the interim rule is, but Treasury.gov has a list of items that are already approved, and housing and food insecurity and a lot of these items that I mentioned are already there. So we don't have to worry about whether or not they're eligible. They already are. So again, thank you for tonight, and I've enjoyed being here. Thank you.
Sam, can I say something?
Thank you, Ms. Cougar. Yes, JP Madison.
I wanted to thank JP Dennis for raising the issue about the road department. My understanding is that a lot of the folks down there, the 3.5% raise is going to amount to 62 cents an hour, which is about $100 a month. So we need to do something. But I also wanted to say, JP Hires is not here tonight. I don't know if you all know. She is in Boston with her mother, who is hospitalized. Her mom and stepdad were going to Boston for a weekend fall foliage trip, and she had to be admitted to the hospital, was almost unconscious, and is having open heart surgery on Wednesday. So if you all would keep her in your prayers, and that's why she's not here. She was really sad to miss it. So
thank you, JP Madison. JP Rio Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to respond to JP Dennis's agenda item about the road department. I completely agree with you. You know, I know that when we passed the adjustments to the pay ranges out of the Personnel Committee the month before last, I know that several of us were disappointed that it didn't do more. You know, I definitely would welcome a amendment to the 2022 budget, and I would definitely support that.
Seeing no further public comment, meeting is adjourned.